I'm Professor Digby Tantum, and I'm here with Dr. Neil Gibson. This is part of a series of very brief interviews with staff at the New School of Psychotherapy and Counselling in the Existential Academy about topics of relevance to our courses on diversity studies. Neil represents our professional training standards within the organisation, so I'm asking him today whether or not, or why it's inappropriate to discriminate against people, either clients or therapists within the health professions. And I think he has quite a nuanced answer. But over to you, Neil, and let us know your views.
Thanks, Digby. So what I'm thinking, the most obvious reason why people don't discriminate in the health professions, excuse me, and perhaps an ignoble reason would be that you face sanctions by professional bodies, and rightly so, but then maybe a more interesting and noble reason for not discriminating against people is because it's unfair and it marginalizes people and it discourages them from being helped and seeking help and being well and getting well. And but we're also thinking, I think, about what the meaning of discrimination is and how sometimes it is important to make distinctions and to discriminate in a not necessarily in a negative way. And that, for example, training to be a therapist, you're expected to be an adult when applying. So we would discriminate against a very young applicant, let's say someone who was 16 or 12, we wouldn't accept an application from them. And that's on common sense ground that we hold that actually you do need to have an adult mind to be able to function and to complete the elements of a training. But where it's not helpful is where you're thinking in your own interests about not wanting to be available or to provide a service for a particular group of people because of biases that you have around them. And that excludes them from things unfairly. And the other thing that has me thinking about discrimination is around what kind of world you want to live in. So the reason you shouldn't discriminate is because it in some way dilutes us as people and society, and it means our horizon of our understanding is narrower. And by having difference and diversity and including people, whatever groups they are, we become enriched and deeper. And so that has an effect on the social fabric. And I think these things are the reasons why it's important as health professionals not to discriminate against groups of people who might otherwise be marginalized. Another thing we're thinking of is how back in the day, if you were gay, you couldn't train as a psychoanalyst. And that's one thing that came to my mind, and how a profession that sort of tries very hard to stop repression and to make unconscious things conscious was actually going out of its way to make people more repressed and to suppress things because you had to hide in order to train. That's not the case anymore, but that was another way of discriminating against a group of people in this kind of profession. So these are the things that were coming into mind when you posed the question.
Thank you very much, Neil. When we were speaking just before we started this recording, you were pointing out that discrimination is also at the heart of health professions. We make discriminations on the basis of what we think people might need or what they would benefit from. And we
Yeah.
exercise a judgment about that. We don't just ask them what they need. We try and think what would be good for them given our professional experience.
Mm.
The
Mm.
difficulty, as it seems to me, is it becomes very hard then to know whether one's discriminating on the basis of evidence or is discriminating on the basis of prejudice. You mentioned a prejudice that psychoanalysts used to have, for example, about being gay. So how do you think we can effectively deal with that in our profession?
Well, it's really tough, isn't it? Because if you were, for just to stick with that example, if you were a psychoanalyst back in the day, you would have been acting what you thought was from a position of integrity based on the theory that was espoused by that particular psychoanalytic doctrine. So actually, at that time, you weren't, in your mind, being discriminatory in a negative way. You were doing what you thought was right. It's only now that we think of it as being a bad thing. But you do have to make distinctions and act with integrity. I think that's the thing. If you act in the best interests of the group of people or the person you're working with, to the best of your knowledge, and not in your own interests, but for them, then I think that's probably going a long way to trying as best as you can not to discriminate. But it might be that you do discriminate one way or another. None of us can completely be without prejudices or biases, but it's what you do with it, the attitude you have towards them and how you approach it that is significant, I think.
Yes, I agree. And there are always multiple voices to be listened to, aren't there? So often in health professions have spoken with a voice that's very much, as you say, embedded in tradition or training, but much less often in experience because there's been a bias in access to health professions. They've tended to include only certain groups and certain cultures. So perhaps another part of it is that, like you're open to people's other alternative expressions. You don't blank them out, but you listen. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily agree or follow them, but you're open to hidden voices. And of course, in our culture, we're exposed to that more and more, aren't we? People saying, you're not listening to me. You don't know what it's like to be me. In the health professions, sometimes people are called experts by experience for that reason, that they might not have professional expertise, but they have the expertise of hard won through life experience. So I suppose that's a part of it too. And all of us, I guess, at times do want to close down and say, no, I'm right, just go along with what I say. But I guess you can't really afford to do that ever, I suppose.
Well, yeah, well, it becomes a sort of becomes like a sort of fascist regime, doesn't it? If what you say is right or what your institution says is right, then there's no other way, there's no other inlet to it or extra thinking about it. But you've just also got me thinking about difference and how experience changes people. It's lived experience changes you, changes the way that you think. And that is it. Kipling has said that no man knows England who only England knows. I'm sure, or someone like that. I can't remember. But the point is that it's come into my mind about how it's through moving away from where you are or start from that you get a different perspective on where you originally were. So actually, this is a bit like moving to different cultures or countries, but it's not just moving there; it's allowing them to come and move in too. So that gives you a different angle at which to see it. Also furnishes you with with something new, with a different feeling or a different awareness or an understanding. You know, that it opens you up.
Yes.
I think that's what it's making me think of, and that
Thank you very much.
you're as
Yeah, I think you covered a very complex subject briefly, but you know, very revealingly. So thank you for that, and best of luck with your professional training course in psychotherapy in NSPC. So, which
Thank
is
you.
strength to strength, isn't it? So
Yes, it is EPT.
I'll say goodbye for today anyway. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thanks.